My name is Monroe, and I am 27 years old. After years of hard work, I finally saved enough for my own apartment, my sanctuary, away from my controlling parents and irresponsible sister Heather. Last Tuesday, I came home early from work to find boxes scattered across my living room and my sister asleep in my bed. The keys I thought only I possessed had been secretly duplicated. My safe space was violated in the worst way possible. If you have ever had family members cross your boundaries, let me know where you are watching from and hit subscribe. This story might just give you the courage to stand up for yourself. Growing up in the Peterson household meant living under a microscope. My parents monitored everything from the friends I made to the clothes I wore. Every decision required their approval. Their love, though genuine, came wrapped in layers of control that suffocated any chance at developing my own identity. "We just want what's best for you, Monroe," they would say whenever I questioned their authority. And for years I believed them. I thought their constant supervision was normal, that all parents dictated their children's lives with such precision. The stark contrast in how they treated Heather made their control over me even more apparent. My sister, 4 years younger, enjoyed freedoms I never knew. When she wanted to dye her hair purple at 14, they laughed it off as expressing herself. When I asked to get highlights at 16, they lectured me about presenting myself respectfully. Heather could stay out until midnight. I had a strict 10 o'clock curfew. The double standard was glaring, but questioning it only led to more restrictions. "Your sister is different," Mom would explain. "She needs more freedom to find herself." What they really meant was that Heather was the favorite, the one they indulged, while I became the responsible one by default. Despite their micromanagement, I excelled academically. I won scholarships, worked part-time jobs throughout high school and college, and saved every penny. My goal was crystal clear independence. Financial freedom meant making my own choices without justifying them to anyone. College provided a taste of autonomy, but living in dorms and shared apartments still left me yearning for a space that was truly mine. After graduation, I landed a job as an IT specialist at a healthcare company. The salary wasn't extraordinary, but it was steady. For 3 years, I lived with roommates, sacrificing privacy to save money. 6 months ago, everything changed. After countless property viewings and financial calculations, I found it. A 1-bedroom apartment in a quiet building with hardwood floors, large windows, and most importantly, my name alone on the lease. The day I signed those papers and received my keys, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Finally, a space where no one could tell me what to do, how to live, or who I could be. My parents were less than enthusiastic about my achievement. "You're throwing money away on rent," Dad argued during their first visit. "You could be saving for a house instead of this temporary situation." Mom examined my furniture choices with barely concealed disapproval. "Wouldn't you prefer something more traditional? This modern stuff will go out of style so quickly." Their critiques stung, but I stood firm. This apartment represented more than just a place to live. It was proof that I could make my own way without their approval or assistance. Then came the suggestion that would foreshadow the disaster to come. "You know," Mom said casually, as she inspected my kitchen cabinets, "this place is actually quite spacious for one person. Heather is having trouble with her roommates again. Maybe she could stay with you for a while." I nearly dropped the coffee mug I was holding. "That's not going to happen." Monroe Dad chimed in, his tone suggesting, "I was being unreasonable. Your sister is family. She's going through a rough patch." "Heather is always going through a rough patch," I replied. "She dropped out of college, can't hold a job for more than 3 months, and spends money like it grows on trees. I love her, but I won't enable her." Their disappointment was palpable. But I remained resolute. My apartment was my sanctuary, and I wasn't about to compromise that for anyone. Especially not for Heather, who had never shown respect for my belongings or my boundaries. In the months that followed, Heather's situation worsened. She lost her retail job for chronic tardiness. Then came the news that she was being evicted for non-payment of rent. With each new crisis, my parents' pressure intensified. Just until she gets back on her feet, Mom pleaded during one of our weekly phone calls. "She can sleep on your couch," I suggested. "Your house has plenty of room. You know we converted your old bedroom into Dad's home office," she countered. "And the guest room is full of my craft supplies." "So, clear out the craft supplies," I said, growing frustrated. "I just got my own place. I'm not ready to share it." Their disappointment turned to barely veiled anger. Dad suggested I was being selfish. Mom implied that my independence had made me cold. I weathered their emotional manipulation, reminding myself that setting boundaries wasn't selfish, it was necessary. What I didn't realize then was how far they would go to override my decision. I had established my boundaries clearly and repeatedly. I had no idea they were already planning to bulldoze right through them. Tuesday started like any ordinary workday. I woke at 6, went for a quick jog, showered, and dressed in my usual business casual attire. The morning meeting went well, and I was making good progress on a system upgrade when the migraine hit. A drilling pain behind my right eye that made looking at the computer screen unbearable. "You should go home," my supervisor suggested after finding me in the break room with the lights off, massaging my temples. "This upgrade can wait until tomorrow." I rarely left work early, but the pain was intensifying. By 11:30, I had gathered my things and was driving back to my apartment, looking forward to my dark bedroom and the prescription medication in my bathroom cabinet. The first sign that something was wrong was the unfamiliar pair of shoes by my front door. Hot pink flip-flops that certainly weren't mine. For a moment, I wondered if I had entered the wrong apartment, but my key had worked, and the family photo I kept on the entryway table was definitely mine. "Hello," I called out, confusion temporarily overriding my migraine. No answer. I stepped further into my living room and froze. Cardboard boxes were stacked against the wall. A suitcase I didn't recognize stood by the couch. On my coffee table, which I always kept pristinely clear, sat makeup, hair products, and fashion magazines, my heart racing. I moved toward my bedroom, hoping to find an explanation. What I saw made my blood run cold. My sister Heather was sprawled across my bed, headphones on, sound asleep in the middle of the day. Around her were more of her possessions, some on my dresser, others spilling out of bags on the floor. I stood there for a full minute trying to process what I was seeing. Had I given her a key and forgotten? No, that was impossible. I hadn't seen Heather in weeks, and I certainly hadn't invited her to stay. "Heather," I said loud enough to penetrate her headphones. When she didn't stir, I reached over and tapped her shoulder firmly. She jolted awake, eyes wide with surprise. Upon seeing me, her expression shifted from shock to a casual smile, as if there was nothing unusual about her presence in my bed in my apartment in the middle of a workday. "Oh hey," she said, pulling off her headphones. "You're home early. What are you doing here?" I demanded, my voice tight with restrained anger. "How did you get in?" Heather sat up, stretching casually. "Mom and Dad gave me a key. They said we worked everything out, and that I could move in." She gestured to her belongings scattered around my bedroom. "I got here this morning. Was going to surprise you when you got home from work." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. My parents had somehow made copies of my keys, given them to Heather, and told her she could move into my apartment without my knowledge or consent. "We did not work anything out," I said, slowly fighting to keep my voice steady. "I have repeatedly told everyone that you cannot live here. You need to pack your things and leave. Now." Heather's casual demeanor faltered, but Mom and Dad said, "I don't care what they said. This is my apartment. My name is on the lease. I pay the rent. And I did not give you permission to be here." "Don't be so dramatic," she scoffed, reaching for her phone. "I'll call Mom and Dad. They'll explain everything." As she dialed, my mind raced back to my parents' visit 2 months ago. Dad had asked to use the bathroom multiple times. Mom had insisted on making lunch in my kitchen, sending me to the grocery store for ingredients. They'd had plenty of opportunities to take my keys and make copies without my knowledge. The violation of trust hit me like a physical blow. These were the people who were supposed to respect me, who should have been proud of my independence. Instead, they had conspired behind my back to undermine everything I had worked for. Heather's conversation was brief. Yeah, she's here. No, she's freaking out. Okay. She looked up at me with a smug expression. They're on their way over. They'll be here in 10 minutes. 10 minutes. That meant they were already nearby, probably waiting to help Heather settle in while I was supposed to be at work. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. This was a coordinated invasion of my privacy. While waiting for my parents to arrive, I examined more of Heather's belongings. She had clearly planned to stay long-term. Her favorite wall decorations were stacked against the living room wall. Her collection of scented candles, which I was allergic to, sat on my dining table. She had even brought her fish tank, currently empty, but ready to be filled. Where exactly were you planning to put all this stuff? I asked, gesturing around. Mom thought we could rearrange things, Heather replied casually. Maybe get rid of some of your more boring pieces. Before I could respond to this astounding statement, a key turned in my lock, and my parents walked in as if they owned the place. Monroe, Mom exclaimed with false cheerfulness. What a surprise to see you home. Are you feeling all right? No, I replied coldly. I am not all right. I just found out my family has been plotting behind my back to violate my privacy and ignore my clearly stated boundaries. Dad stepped forward, his expression stern. Now, Monroe, there's no need for dramatics. We're just trying to help both our daughters. Heather needs a place to stay, and you have space. It's the sensible solution. The sensible solution would have been to respect my decision when I said no, I countered, not making copies of my keys and moving her in without my knowledge. We knew you'd come around once you saw how well it could work, Mom said, her tone suggesting I was being the unreasonable one. Family helps family, Monroe. That's what we've always taught you. The three of them stood together, a united front against me, in my own home. The betrayal was complete. They had conspired, lied, and trespassed, all while convincing themselves they were doing the right thing. The migraine that had brought me home early pulsed behind my eyes, but it was nothing compared to the pain of this breach of trust. This isn't about family helping family, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. This is about respecting boundaries. I said no repeatedly, and you chose to ignore that. Dad waved his hand dismissively. You've always been stubborn, Monroe. Sometimes you need a little push to do the right thing. The right thing, I echoed, incredulous. Breaking into my apartment is the right thing. We didn't break in, Mom corrected. We used a key. A key you had no right to copy, I pointed out. That's still illegal. Heather rolled her eyes. Don't be such a rule follower. It's not like we're strangers. We're family. Family respects each other's boundaries, I insisted. Speaking of, Dad interjected, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. We've already taken care of Heather's first month's contribution to the rent. We paid it directly to your landlord. I snatched the envelope from his hand and pulled out what appeared to be a receipt from my property management company. It showed a payment of $500 toward my rent, with a note indicating it was from Heather Peterson as a new co-tenant. You talked to my landlord, I asked, feeling increasingly like I was in some bizarre nightmare. We explained that we wanted to surprise you with some help, Mom said proudly. Mr. Jenkins was very understanding. My hands trembling with anger, I pulled out my phone and called the property management office. When Mr. Jenkins answered, I put the call on speaker. Mr. Jenkins, this is Monroe Peterson from apartment 3B. My parents are telling me they spoke with you about adding my sister to my lease. Is that true? There was an uncomfortable pause before he responded. Yes, they came by yesterday. They had a signed lease amendment with your signature on it. Everything seemed in order. I never signed any lease amendment, I said, glaring at my parents. Another pause. I have a copy here. It looks like your signature. It's a forgery, I stated flatly. I never authorized this. Mr. Jenkins' discomfort was audible. I'm sorry, Miss Peterson. They seemed so genuine. If you'd like to come by the office, we can sort this out. I'll be there first thing tomorrow, I promised, before hanging up. The room fell silent as I processed this new information. Not only had my parents copied my keys and moved Heather in without permission, but they had also forged my signature on legal documents. The violation went deeper than I had initially realized. You forged my signature, I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Dad had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. We knew you'd be difficult about the paperwork. You committed fraud, I clarified. That's a crime. Oh, stop being so dramatic, Heather interrupted. No one's going to press charges over a little white lie to help family. The walls felt like they were closing in. This wasn't just about an unwanted roommate anymore. This was about 3 people who had decided that my autonomy, my legal rights, and my clearly expressed wishes meant nothing. I want all of you to leave, I said firmly. Now, take Heather's things and go. Mom looked shocked. Monroe, be reasonable. Where is Heather supposed to go? She's already been evicted from her last place. That's not my problem, I replied. She's an adult. She can figure it out just like I did. We're not going anywhere, Dad stated, crossing his arms. Heather's name is on the lease now, whether you like it or not. A lease with a forged signature isn't valid, I pointed out. Prove it was forged, Heather challenged. It'll be your word against ours. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own family was not only violating my boundaries, but threatening to lie to maintain their position. The betrayal cut deep, leaving me breathless with hurt and anger. As if to emphasize her point, Heather moved to my bookshelf and began clearing a shelf for her items. In the process, she knocked over a ceramic figurine a friend had brought me from Japan. It shattered on the hardwood floor. Oops, she said, without a hint of remorse. It was ugly anyway. That casual destruction of something precious to me was the final straw. I needed them out of my apartment before I said or did something I might regret. Retreating to the bathroom, I locked the door behind me and sat on the edge of the tub trying to calm my racing heart. Through the door, I could hear them discussing where Heather's things should go, completely disregarding my objections. They were rearranging my life without my consent, confident that I would eventually give in, as I had so many times before. But this time was different. This time, they had gone too far. This wasn't about borrowing clothes without asking or reading my diary as a teenager. This was breaking and entering forgery, and a complete disregard for my autonomy as an adult. I pulled out my phone and searched for the non-emergency police number. My hand hovered over the call button as doubts flooded my mind. Could I really call the police on my own family? Would they even take this seriously? What would the consequences be? But then I heard the sound of more things being moved in my living room, Heather's laugh as she probably displaced more of my belongings, and Mom's voice saying, "Once she calms down, she'll see this is for the best." They thought they knew me so well. They thought I would continue to be the compliant daughter who eventually gave in to their demands. They thought wrong. I pressed call, and when the dispatcher answered, I explained the situation as calmly as I could. Unauthorized key duplication, trespassing, forgery, refusal to leave when asked. When I emerged from the bathroom, Dad was rearranging my kitchen cabinets to make room for Heather's collection of novelty mugs. "The police are on their way," I announced. All 3 of them froze, then burst into laughter. "Good one. Monroe Heather snickered. Like you'd actually call the cops on your own family. You have 15 minutes to start packing before they arrive. I said, my resolve strengthening with each word. I suggest you use that time wisely. Mom approached me, her expression, a mixture of concern and condescension. Honey, you're overreacting. Let's all sit down and talk about this like adults. I've been trying to talk about this for months, I replied. You chose not to listen. Now you can explain yourselves to the police. You're bluffing, Dad said, but I could see the first flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Try me, I challenged. For 15 tense minutes we stood at an impasse. They made no move to pack, clearly convinced I wouldn't follow through. I made no move to back down, my determination hardening with each passing minute. When the doorbell rang, the look of shock on their faces was almost worth all the pain they had caused me. Almost. 2 officers stood at my door, a man and a woman, both with expressions of professional neutrality that gave away nothing about their thoughts on being called to a family dispute. Miss Peterson, the female officer asked. Yes, I'm Monroe Peterson. Thank you for coming, I said, stepping back to let them enter. My parents immediately moved forward, Dad extending his hand in greeting. Officers, there seems to be a misunderstanding. I'm James Peterson, Monroe's father. This is a family matter that got a little heated. The male officer didn't take the offered hand. Sir, we received a call about trespassing and unauthorized entry. Can everyone present? Please, identify themselves. As my parents and Heather introduced themselves, I could see them relaxing, confident that once the police understood we were family, they would dismiss the situation as a domestic squabble and leave us to sort it out ourselves. Miss Peterson, the female officer addressed me. Can you explain the situation from your perspective? I took a deep breath and laid out the facts as clearly as I could. This is my apartment. I live alone. My name is the only one on the lease. While I was at work today, my sister moved in without my permission using keys that my parents had copied without my knowledge. When I asked them to leave, they refused. I also discovered they forged my signature on a lease amendment with my landlord. The officers exchanged glances before the male officer asked, Do you have proof of residence? I retrieved my lease agreement and recent utility bills, all in my name only. I can also show you text messages from the past few months where I explicitly told my family that Heather could not move in with me. As the officers reviewed my documentation, Mom stepped forward, her voice taking on the concerned tone she used when trying to convince others I was being difficult. Officers were very worried about Monroe. She's been under a lot of stress lately, and she's not thinking clearly. Her sister needs a place to stay, and Monroe has plenty of room. We're just trying to help our daughters. By copying keys without permission and entering her apartment when she wasn't home, the female officer asked, raising an eyebrow. We're her parents, Dad said, as if that explained everything. We've always had keys to her places. Not to this apartment, I corrected. I never gave you keys to this apartment. The male officer turned to my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, did you make copies of your daughter's keys without her permission? Dad shifted uncomfortably. We had the keys copied, yes, but we're her parents. We were just looking out for her safety. And you used these unauthorized keys to enter the apartment and move your younger daughter in, the officer continued. We were helping Heather, Mom insisted. Monroe works such long hours. We didn't want to bother her. The officer's expression made it clear he wasn't buying their justification. And the lease amendment with Miss Peterson's signature. Did she sign that in your presence? A tense silence followed. Even my parents seemed to realize they couldn't admit to forgery without serious consequences. It was just a formality. Dad finally said, avoiding a direct answer. Family helps family. We shouldn't need paperwork between us. The female officer addressed my sister. Miss Heather Peterson, did you know that your sister had not given permission for you to move in? Heather shrugged, her attitude dismissive. She's just being selfish. She has all this space and won't share. I knew she'd get over it once I was here. So you were aware that she had not consented to this arrangement? The officer pressed. Whatever Heather muttered. It's not a big deal. The officers stepped aside to confer quietly before the male officer turned to my family. Mr. and Mrs. Peterson. Miss Heather Peterson. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises immediately. Miss Monroe Peterson has made it clear you do not have permission to be here. This is ridiculous, Dad sputtered. We are not criminals. We're family trying to help each other. Regardless of your intentions, sir, you entered this apartment without the legal tenant's permission using unauthorized keys. That constitutes trespassing, the officer explained. I suggest you comply and leave peacefully. Mom turned to me, tears welling in her eyes. Monroe, please don't do this. We can talk about this. We're your family. You should have thought about that before you violated my trust. I said, my voice steady, despite the emotional turmoil inside. Please leave. I'm not going anywhere. Heather declared, flopping down on my couch. This is stupid. You can't just throw me out on the street. The female officer stepped forward. Miss Peterson, I won't ask again. Please gather your belongings and leave voluntarily. Or what Heather challenged. You'll arrest me for sitting on my sister's couch. Good luck with that. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. As the officers moved toward Heather to escort her out, she jumped up from the couch and shoved the female officer back. Mom grabbed the male officer's arm, trying to prevent him from approaching Heather. Dad positioned himself between the officers and Heather, his hands raised in a blocking gesture. You are not taking my daughter anywhere, he stated firmly. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The officer's demeanor changed from patient mediation to alert readiness. Sir, you need to step back, the male officer ordered. Interfering with police officers in the execution of their duty is a criminal offense. Dad didn't move. This is a family matter. The police have no business here. What followed was chaos. Heather continued to resist, screaming profanities. Mom refused to let go of the officer's arm. Dad wouldn't step aside. Warnings were issued and ignored. And then came the words I never thought I'd hear in my own living room. James Peterson, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice and interfering with a police officer. Margaret Peterson, you're under arrest for the same charges. Heather Peterson, you're under arrest for assault on a police officer and resisting arrest. The sound of handcuffs clicking closed echoed in the sudden silence of my apartment. My family looked at me with expressions of shock and betrayal, as if I had been the one to cross a line. As they were let out, neighbors peered from their doorways, witnessing my family drama spill into the public domain. In the aftermath, standing alone in my apartment, with Heather's belongings still scattered around, I felt a confusing mix of emotions. Relief that they were gone. Vindication that my boundaries had finally been enforced, but also a deep, aching sadness that it had come to this. That the people who should have respected me the most had forced me to take such drastic measures to protect myself. I sat down on my couch, surrounded by the evidence of their violation, and allowed myself for the first time since coming home to break down and cry. The silence in my apartment that evening was deafening. After the police left with my family in custody, I stood among Heather's scattered belongings, feeling hollow. The migraine that had sent me home early was now a dull throb compared to the emotional pain coursing through me. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, gathering Heather's things into boxes, trying to process what had just happened. Had I overreacted? Was there another way I could have handled the situation? The questions swirled in my mind, but deep down I knew I had done what was necessary. They had left me no choice. My phone began ringing incessantly around 7 that evening. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all calling to express their shock and disapproval. Word had spread quickly through the family grapevine. "How could you have your own parents arrested?" my Aunt Barbara demanded. When I finally answered, "They broke into my apartment." I explained, my voice raw from crying. "They're your parents. They were trying to help your sister. They forged my signature on legal documents. They gave copies of my keys to Heather without my permission. They refused to leave when I asked them to. Family helps family, Monroe. You don't call the police on your own blood." This sentiment was echoed in call after call. Family helps family. As if that justified any violation, any disregard for personal boundaries. As if my needs, my space, my clearly expressed wishes counted for nothing in the face of family obligation. By midnight, emotionally exhausted, I turned off my phone and crawled into bed. Sleep eluded me. Every creak in the apartment made me tense, half expecting to hear a key in the lock again. The sanctuary I had worked so hard for now felt violated, unsafe. The next morning, I called in sick to work and made an appointment with a lawyer who specialized in restraining orders. Her office was small but welcoming, with certificates on the wall and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put me at ease. "Let me get this straight," she said after I explained the situation. "Your parents made unauthorized copies of your apartment keys, moved your sister in without your consent, while you were at work forged your signature on a lease amendment, and then refused to leave when confronted." I nodded, relieved that someone finally understood the gravity of what had happened. "And when the police asked them to leave, they physically interfered, resulting in their arrest." "Yes," I confirmed. "My sister actually shoved one of the officers." The lawyer leaned back in her chair. "You have grounds for a restraining order, especially with the unauthorized entry and forgery. Do you want to pursue that?" Did I? The thought of legally barring my family from contacting me was both liberating and heartbreaking. But the alternative, allowing them to continue disregarding my boundaries, was worse. "Yes," I said firmly. "I want to pursue it." After the lawyer's office, I went straight to my property management company. Mr. Jenkins looked profoundly uncomfortable when I entered his office. "Miss Peterson, I cannot apologize enough for the misunderstanding. If I had known the lease amendment wasn't authorized by you—" "It's not your fault," I assured him. "They were very convincing. But I need to make sure this doesn't happen again. I want to change the locks immediately." "Of course," he agreed readily. "We can have that done today. And I've already voided the amendment. Your sister's name has been removed from all paperwork." That afternoon, I watched as the maintenance worker installed new locks on my door. I also purchased a security camera that would alert my phone if anyone entered the apartment, and a door wedge alarm for additional peace of mind. As I was setting up the camera, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was my parents' lawyer. "Miss Peterson, I'm representing your parents in this unfortunate incident. They're very distressed by the misunderstanding." "There was no misunderstanding," I replied. "They knew exactly what they were doing. They're your parents, Miss Peterson. They were acting out of concern for both their daughters. Surely we can resolve this without further legal proceedings." "They broke the law," I stated. "Multiple laws, in fact. Family matters are complex," he continued smoothly. "I'm sure the court would look more favorably on everyone if charges were dropped, and you all worked this out privately." I thought about it for a moment. Could we work this out privately? Would my parents and Heather suddenly respect my boundaries if I gave them another chance? Their past behavior suggested otherwise. "I'll consider it," I said finally, not wanting to make any promises. Over the next few days, as I tried to restore order to my apartment and my life, I made a disturbing discovery. While going through some papers on my desk, I realized several envelopes had been opened and resealed. My mail had been read. A quick check of my computer showed that someone had accessed my files. My personal journal, which I kept in my bedside drawer, had pages dog-eared that hadn't been marked when I last wrote in it. The invasion went deeper than I had initially thought. They hadn't just moved Heather in. They had gone through my personal belongings, read my private thoughts, accessed my information without permission. The violation felt complete. That discovery made my decision easier. I contacted my lawyer and confirmed that I wanted to press charges for breaking and entering, forgery, and trespassing. I also proceeded with the restraining order application. The backlash from family was immediate and harsh. Cousins the first had been close to stopped speaking to me. My grandmother left a voicemail telling me she was deeply disappointed in my choices. Only my Aunt Diane, who had experienced similar controlling behavior from my parents when she was younger, offered support. "You're doing the right thing," she told me over coffee. "They've been doing this to you your whole life, just in smaller ways." It was bound to escalate eventually. "I never thought it would come to this," I admitted. "That's because they trained you to feel responsible for their feelings and actions," she observed. "That's what controlling people do. They make you think their behavior is your fault." Her words resonated deeply. How many times had I apologized for making my parents worry? How often had I changed my plans to avoid causing their disappointment? I had been conditioned to prioritize their feelings over my own needs. And breaking that pattern felt both terrifying and necessary. My therapist, whom I started seeing weekly after the incident, helped me work through the complex emotions. The guilt for having my family arrested, the anger at their violation, the grief for the relationship I had hoped we could have, the fear that I was overreacting, being too harsh, burning bridges that could never be rebuilt. Setting boundaries isn't about punishing others, she reminded me. It's about protecting yourself. You're not responsible for how they choose to respond to those boundaries. Slowly, painfully, I began to see the situation with clearer eyes. My parents and Heather hadn't respected my clearly communicated boundaries. They had planned and executed a significant violation of my privacy and autonomy. When confronted, they had doubled down rather than acknowledging their wrongdoing. And when authorities became involved, they had escalated the situation to the point of physical confrontation. These weren't the actions of people who respected me as an independent adult. These were the actions of people who saw me as an extension of themselves, existing to fulfill their expectations and meet their needs. And no matter how much I loved them, I couldn't allow that dynamic to continue. The first court appearance was surreal. Sitting on one side of the courtroom while my parents and sister sat on the other, separated by more than just physical space. They looked smaller, somehow less intimidating than they had in my apartment. Dad's usually immaculate appearance was slightly disheveled. Mom kept dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Heather glared at me with undisguised hostility. Their lawyer, an expensive-looking man in a tailored suit, approached me before proceedings began. "Your parents are prepared to issue a formal apology," he offered. "In exchange, we're hoping you'll consider dropping the charges and restraining order request." "What about Heather?" I asked. "Is she also prepared to apologize?" He glanced back at my sister, who was pointedly looking away. "We're working on that aspect." "Then we have nothing to discuss," I replied, moving to take my seat. The hearing itself was brief but uncomfortable. The judge reviewed the police report, my lease agreement, and the forged amendment. My parents' lawyer tried to paint the situation as a well-intentioned family misunderstanding that had spiraled out of control. "Your Honor, the Petersons were simply trying to help both their daughters. Miss Monroe Peterson has a spacious apartment, and her sister was in need of housing. Perhaps their methods were unorthodox, but their intentions were pure." My lawyer countered with evidence of my repeated refusals to have Heather move in, documented in text messages and emails dating back months. She also presented photos of the damaged property and violated personal items found after they left. "This wasn't a miscommunication," she argued. "This was a deliberate disregard for Miss Peterson's clearly expressed boundaries, followed by property damage and invasion of privacy." The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, seemed unimpressed by my family's justifications. Family connections do not override the law, she stated firmly. Unauthorized entry is still trespassing, regardless of relation. Signing someone else's name is still forgery, even if you're their parent. The next hearing 2 weeks later was when things really got messy. My parents' lawyer attempted to paint me as ungrateful and vindictive, someone who would call the police on her own family over a minor disagreement. Miss Peterson has a history of overreacting, he claimed. She has always been resistant to family assistance, preferring to isolate herself. This extreme response to her parents' attempt to help is consistent with that pattern. My parents nodded along as if his words confirmed what they had always known about me. Heather rolled her eyes dramatically whenever my name was mentioned. When it was my turn to speak, I tried to keep my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. This wasn't about refusing help, I explained. This was about having my clearly stated boundaries ignored. I said no to this arrangement repeatedly. Instead of respecting my decision, they went behind my back, made illegal copies of my keys, forged my signature, and invaded my home. When confronted, they refused to leave and damaged my property. What they call help, I call control. The judge asked if there had been previous incidents of boundary violations. With my therapist's encouragement, I shared some of the controlling behaviors I had experienced growing up. The constant monitoring of my activities, the reading of my diary, the insistence on knowing my whereabouts at all times well into adulthood, the criticism of my independent choices. And has this pattern continued into your adult life? The judge inquired. Yes, I admitted. They've shown up unannounced at my workplace. They've contacted my friends to check on me when I don't answer their calls quickly enough. They've criticized my career choices, my living arrangements, even my furniture. Objection, my parents' lawyer interrupted. Parental concern is not control. Overruled, the judge stated. Please continue, Miss Peterson. I described how I had tried to establish healthy boundaries over the years, only to have them dismissed or circumvented. How this incident wasn't an isolated event, but the culmination of a lifetime of having my autonomy disregarded. When the court adjourned for the day, I felt emotionally drained, but also strangely empowered. For perhaps the first time, I had publicly named the dynamic that had shaped my relationship with my family. I had spoken my truth, without minimizing or making excuses for their behavior. The fallout within the extended family was immediate and dramatic. Lines were drawn. Sides were taken. My mother's brother stopped speaking to me, entirely convinced I was being cruel to my parents in their golden years. My father's sister sent me a lengthy email detailing all the sacrifices my parents had made for me and how I was repaying them with ingratitude. Other relatives were more conflicted, unsure who to believe or how to navigate the family division. Holiday plans were thrown into disarray. Long-standing traditions suddenly seemed untenable with the family fracture. Through it all, my Aunt Diane remained steadfast in her support. They're circling the wagons, she observed, after another relative criticized me for airing family dirty laundry in court. Controlling families hate it when someone breaks, ranks, and speaks the truth. The most unexpected support came from my cousin Jeremy, who called me late one night after the second hearing. I believe you, he said simply. I've seen how they treat you compared to Heather. I've seen how they dismiss your feelings. I just never had the words for it until I heard your testimony. His validation meant more than he could know. In a sea of family members telling me I was overreacting, his acknowledgement of my experience felt like a life raft. Heather, meanwhile, had taken to social media to share her version of events. According to her posts, I was a selfish monster who had her arrested for just needing a place to crash. She conveniently omitted the unauthorized key copying the forgery and her assault on a police officer. Her friends left comments calling me heartless and cruel, suggesting I deserved whatever bad karma would come my way for turning on my own family. The messages hurt, but they also reinforced that I had made the right decision. Heather showed no remorse, no recognition that she had violated my boundaries. In her mind, and in my parents' minds, I was the problem for not acquiescing to their demands. The final ruling came a month after the initial incident. The judge granted the restraining order requiring my parents and Heather to maintain a distance of at least 100 yards from me, my home, and my workplace. They were prohibited from contacting me directly for 6 months, after which the order would be reviewed. Additionally, my parents received 6 months of probation for the unauthorized entry and forgery. Heather, due to her physical confrontation with the officer, received community service and a more serious warning about her future conduct. As we left the courtroom, my mother attempted to approach me only to be held back by my father. "The order is effective immediately, Margaret," he reminded her, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. Watching them walk away, I felt a complex mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that my boundaries would now have legal protection. Sadness that it had taken such extreme measures to secure that protection. 2 days after the ruling, I received a letter from my parents. It was carefully worded, obviously reviewed by their lawyer, to ensure it didn't violate the restraining order. "We are deeply sorry that our actions caused you distress," they wrote. "That was never our intention. We only wanted to help both our daughters during a difficult time. We hope that in time, you will understand that everything we did was out of love, and that you will find it in your heart to forgive us." The apology, if it could even be called, that still placed the burden on me. I needed to understand their motives. I needed to forgive their actions. There was no real acknowledgement that what they did was wrong, only regret that I had been upset by it. I didn't respond to the letter. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my sense of security in my apartment. The new locks and security camera helped, but the psychological damage took longer to address. I jumped at unexpected sounds. I checked and rechecked that the door was locked before going to bed. I felt anxious when I saw cars that resembled my parents in the parking lot. Through my Aunt Diane, I learned that Heather had moved in with our cousin Michael, who had a spare room in his basement. She was telling anyone who would listen that I had overreacted to a simple misunderstanding and that the legal system was biased against her. My parents, according to Diane, were putting on a brave face publicly but were devastated privately. "Your mother cries at every family gathering," she reported. "Your father has lost weight. They genuinely don't understand why you've taken such drastic measures." Their lack of understanding was perhaps the most painful part of the whole ordeal. Even with legal consequences, even with a restraining order, they still couldn't see how their actions had violated my trust and autonomy. In their minds, they were the victims of my unreasonable reaction, not the perpetrators of a serious boundary violation. That realization helped me come to terms with the distance between us. If they couldn't acknowledge the harm they had caused, how could we ever build a healthy relationship? Perhaps the separation, painful as it was necessary for all of us. 6 months passed in the blink of an eye, and with the crawling slowness of grief, my apartment, once a symbol of independence tainted by violation, gradually became my sanctuary again. Each day that passed, without an unexpected visitor each night, I slept soundly, without fear of intrusion, rebuilt my sense of security bit by bit. The restraining order review hearing approached with a mixture of dread and resolve. Would I extend it? Would I allow limited contact? What boundaries would I set if we were to have any relationship moving forward? My therapist helped me work through these questions, encouraging me to focus on what I needed to feel safe rather than what might please or appease my family. "Healthy relationships have healthy boundaries," she reminded me. "If they can't respect your boundaries, they're not ready for a healthy relationship with you." After careful consideration, I decided to modify the restraining order rather than extend it in full. My parents would be allowed limited contact phone calls once a week and monthly visits in public places only. Heather would remain under the full order, as she had shown no remorse or understanding of her actions. When I presented this decision to the judge, my parents' relief was visible. They had dressed formally for the hearing, as if to demonstrate their respectability to the court. Mom had lost weight, and Dad's hair seemed grayer than I remembered. "We accept these terms," their lawyer stated. "The Petersons are committed to rebuilding trust with their daughter and will abide by these conditions without complaint." Heather, predictably, was less accepting. "This is ridiculous," she muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. "She's still playing the victim." The judge's gavel silenced her protests. "The modified order is granted as requested. Miss Heather Peterson, I remind you that violating a restraining order is a serious offense. Your disruptive behavior in this courtroom does not inspire confidence in your willingness to comply." Outside the courthouse, I stood alone watching my family depart in separate directions. My parents, to their car, their postures slightly more upright than when they had arrived. Heather, to a friend's waiting vehicle, her expression stormy. Me to my own life, forever changed by the stand I had taken. The first phone call from my parents, exactly 1 week after the hearing, was awkward and stilted. We talked about the weather, about a new restaurant that had opened downtown, about anything but the elephant in the room. As the weeks passed, our conversations became slightly less formal, but never truly comfortable. There was too much unspoken between us. Too many wounds, still tender to the touch. Our first in-person meeting was at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory for all of us. Mom brought photos of my cousin's new baby. Dad talked about a retirement community they were considering. I shared stories about a professional development conference I had attended. We were polite strangers sharing DNA and history, but little else. As for Heather, she maintained her distance, legally required and personally preferred. Through family grapevine, I heard she had found a job at a boutique and was dating someone new. She told anyone who would listen that I was dead to her, that I had betrayed the family by having them arrested. Her narrative never changed, never acknowledged her role in what had happened. The most unexpected outcome of the whole ordeal was the new relationships that formed in the aftermath. Friends who had witnessed my struggle to establish boundaries with my family became closer, more trusted confidants. Colleagues who had seen me at my lowest during the court proceedings offered support without judgment. My Aunt Diane, once a distant relative I saw only at holidays, became a weekly lunch companion and trusted advisor. Even Mr. Jenkins, my landlord, became something of a protector. He personally checked all maintenance requests for my apartment and installed additional security features at no extra cost. "No one should feel unsafe in their own home," he told me. "I'm sorry I didn't verify that lease amendment more carefully." In therapy, I worked through the complex emotions that continued to surface. Guilt for the legal consequences my family faced. Anger at their violation, and subsequent lack of genuine remorse. Grief for the relationship I had hoped we might have. Relief at finally establishing firm boundaries that were respected, even if only because of legal enforcement. Family dynamics are formed over decades, my therapist explained. They don't change overnight, and sometimes they don't change at all. Your job isn't to fix your family or make them understand. Your job is to take care of yourself and establish the boundaries you need to be healthy. Those words became my mantra as I navigated the new normal of limited, structured contact with my parents and no contact with Heather. I learned to release the hope that they would suddenly see the error of their ways and offer genuine apologies. I accepted that they might always view me as the villain in this story, the ungrateful daughter who overreacted to their help. And strangely, that acceptance brought a kind of peace. I couldn't control their perceptions or actions. I could only control my own response, my own boundaries, my own life. 6 months became a year. My career advanced with a promotion that required more travel but offered better pay. I started dating again, cautiously at first. Then, with more confidence, as I learned to recognize and appreciate people who respected my boundaries without being asked twice. I even adopted a cat, something my mother had always vetoed due to her mild allergies. My apartment evolved from a symbol of independence to a true home filled with memories of my choosing, arranged according to my preferences, shared only with those I invited in. The security camera remained a precaution I wasn't quite ready to abandon, but I no longer checked it compulsively throughout the day. On the anniversary of the incident, I took a personal day from work and spent it reflecting on how far I had come. From the devastated woman crying alone in a violated apartment to someone who had rebuilt her sense of security and self-trust. The journey had been painful, the cost high in terms of family relationships, but the growth was undeniable. That evening, I wrote in my journal words I had been feeling for some time, but hadn't fully articulated until then. Sometimes the hardest decisions are the most necessary ones. Setting boundaries with family doesn't mean you don't love them. It means you love yourself enough to protect your well-being. Real love includes respect. Real support honors autonomy. And sometimes the family we choose becomes more important than the family we're born into. Those words weren't just therapy speak or inspirational quotes. They were hard-won wisdom from a year of standing firm despite pressure, guilt, and criticism. They were the foundation upon which I was building a life of my own design, with relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation or control. Would my parents ever truly understand why I had taken such drastic measures? Would Heather ever acknowledge her role in violating my boundaries? I couldn't say. But I knew with certainty that I had done what was necessary to protect myself, my space, and my right to determine who entered my life and on what terms. That knowledge, that unshakable confidence in the rightness of my actions, despite their painful consequences, was perhaps the most valuable outcome of the whole ordeal. I had discovered a strength I didn't know. I possessed a willingness to stand firm, even when it would have been easier to give in. And in that strength, I found not just independence, but true freedom. Freedom from the need for approval. Freedom from the guilt of not meeting others' expectations. Freedom to create the life I wanted, surrounded by people who respected me, not despite my boundaries, but because of them. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to protect your boundaries with family? I know how hard that choice can be and how much courage it takes. If this story resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe to support more content about setting healthy boundaries. Share your own experiences in the comments below, and remember that sometimes standing up for yourself is the most important thing you can do, even when it hurts. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the strength to protect your own boundaries, whatever they may be.